Talking about the female body in the 13th century is a challenging task. This is because within the discourse and system of learning of the time, the female body had not a well-defined epistemic space. Rather, it was theoretically contended by intellectuals from different disciplines. In natural philosophy, the female body was framed within theories concerning causes and powers involved in the generative process. When pondering the female role in embryogenesis, medieval authors investigated the anatomy, the complexion, and the physiology of the female body. In medicine, the female body was mostly the object of gynecology and of physiology of reproduction. The female body was not investigated as a whole, but physicians focused on selected body parts involved in reproduction and the sustainment of the child. In theology and biblical exegesis, the exceptionality of Eve's and Mary's bodies, for different but complementary reasons, challenge fundamental philosophical and medical tenets on the female body. In this talk, I will focus on the theoretical treatment of the first female human being, that is Eve. I will show how different perspectives on the female body merge within the theological discussion on the body of Eve. This provides a privileged standpoint to explore that fluid and controversial theoretical space given to the female body by 13th century authors. Um, 13th century considerations on the female body flourish within the broader theological discussion of the Christian doctrine of the original sin. Just after being created and placed in Eden, Adam fell. In eating the forbidden fruit, he disobeyed God, so he was punished and lost his pristine, privileged condition. After Adam's sin, human nature sank into its fallen state. That is the state we are living in even today. Some medieval theologians explored the counterfactual. What would have become humanity if Adam had not sinned? For 13th century theologians, answering to this question was more than an intellectual exercise. It rather offered the unique occasion to shape the features of the ideal pristine humanity. This counterfactual approach, that became increasingly systematic in late theological literature, generated several models of what we can label hypothetical anthropology. Most of such hypothetical modeling was devoted to the moral, intellectual powers of the human individuals and to what this would entail in terms of political and social organization. There were also a series of questions devoted to the original bodily constitution, to the soul-body relationship, and to the symbolic meaning of the dynamics of creation. For example, they wonder why has God created Adam before Eve, and why she was created out of Adam's side. All these questions merge in the theological textbook of the Faculty of Theology in the 13th century, that is Peter Lombard's Book of Sentences. Here, Peter Lombard explores God's possibility to form Eve's body by using other bodily parts of Adam, such as the head, the feet, the liver. But what would be the result of this alternative hypothetical formation? If Eve was formed out of Adam's head, this would imply that the woman was intended to be the domina, that is, the mistress of the male. On the contrary, if Eve was formed out of Adam's feet, this would imply that the woman was intended to be the ancilla, the slave of the male. The very fact that God creates Eve's body out of the middle of Adam's body means that the woman was intended to be by man's side and thus a socia, partner of the male. So the hypothetical questioning extends also to the female body, eliciting some question or reflection on the female in the hierarchical order of nature, the natural necessity of the second sex, the female body and soul in the pre-lapsarian condition. So, according to theologians of the 13th century, the composition, the organization, and the finality of the feminine body mirror the female place in the hierarchy of nature. The archetypal partnership between male and female was established since the formation of Adam and Eve, and thus is ordered to the broader end, that is, the reproduction of the species. In this framework, the Aristotelian perspective on the female body offers valid arguments in supporting an intrinsic and natural hierarchy between males and females, both as biological principles and individuals in society. For example, when discussing the asymmetry between males and females, medieval thinkers often resorted to the Aristotelian dictum that the female is a defective male. They took it as a justification of the natural hierarchy that they perceived as orders in creation. And more precisely, we know that the Aristotelian claim is the logical consequence of the doctrine according to which nature always tends at producing the most perfect individual, that is the male. Aristotle did not deny the natural necessity of the female. His perspective on the female role in animal generation was, however, strongly biased by a male-centric outlook. Such tenet, even if formulated within Aristotle's biological treatises, did in fact cross the boundaries of natural science and extend to the theological domain. In the following passage that we are going to examine here show this crossing of boundaries. The very fact that the female is a defective male demonstrates the monstrosity of the feminine nature. In the pre-lapsarian condition in the Eden, no defectiveness, no contraries would have been admitted. It follows that, in the state of innocence, the female would have been against nature, and she would have been eventually created by nature to fulfill the precept to increase the humankind. Here we have two passages from Bonaventure commentary on sentences. Bonaventure was a Franciscan friar who lived in the 13th century, and in the first part of this quotation you have the position that I just presented, and in the last part of the sentence you have the Bonaventure reply to that argument. As you can see here, Bonaventure narrows the Aristotelian tenet, the female is a defective male, to the biological domain, and he explained that what is defective is not the female in herself, but the power of nature, which fails in producing what is intended by nature, that is, of course, the male. The Aristotelian claim the female is a defective male in his Summa Theologiae. Here, Thomas is discussing the bisexual creation of the humankind and goes deeper into the reason of the Aristotelian tenet. He explained that, according to Aristotle, the active power of the male seed aims at produce something similar to itself, that is, the male. However, this does not mean that the female is defective to coup. Thus, he distinguished between the female as individual and the female as a universal principle. Here, the existence of the second sex is justified by the finality of the female as mere instrumentality for reproduction. Its finality is purely auxiliary and summed up in her bodily generative function. This, however, does not prevent some authors, such as Albert the Great, to recognize the strength of the female body in comparison to the male, especially as far as concern all those functions ordered to the end of generation, that is, producing a perfect child. Here we have a passage, the first passage from Albert's Summa Theologiae, and here he distinguished the generative functions from the activities that are necessary to the end of the generative process, that are conceiving, bearing, giving birth, and so on. So he agreed with Aristotle in the fact that the male's principle is ontologically superior to the female's. All the active functions are performed by the male seed, whereas the female is conceived as a passive and receptive instrument. This is the reason why, as Albert claimed, the male's power is stronger and more vigorous than the female. However, such strength is not absolute but relative when comparing the paternal and maternal activities that the generation of a child entails. The mother's body is ordered by nature to be stronger. This argumentation of Albert's Summa Theologiae relies on is based on Albert's previous treatment of the difference between maternal and paternal activities that you can see here in the second passage of this slide. In his Ethica, Albert argued that between mothers and children, there is a unique nutritional relationship established since conception. Mothers provide their entire bodies for the sustainment of their child, and this establishes a long-lasting bond that originates in mother's body and continues even after childbirth with the product of her body, that is the milk. So Albert claims that the same relationship cannot be established between fathers and children because, as Albert claims, the father provides just the seed and does not provide anything else to the child's being, to the child's development. Um, So theologian pondered not only over the body difference between male and female, but also over the difference with respect to their souls. Male and female are both endowed with a rational soul. They are both imagined dei. However, a difference between the two sexes arises with respect to moral and cognitive abilities. This is because the woman's body is the weaker and less perfect than the male's. This inferiority affects cognitive and moral activities. But does this also apply to the female body and soul in the pre-lapsarian condition? Moreover, as the consequence of the disobedience, God punished Eve by making the future process of childbirth painful for her and for all subsequent women too. But what would the dynamics of childbirth be like if humanity had remained in the state of innocence? Try to answer to this question, Roland of Cremona, that was the first Dominican master teaching theology at University of Paris. Here, in his Summa Theologiae, he wonders whether, in the state of innocence, sexual intercourse and giving birth would entail any injury to the female body. In doing so, he explored the female body in the state of innocence in the prelapsarian condition. Let's read together. Many wonder whether before the sin, Eve would have received injuries during the sexual intercourse or in giving birth. It seems so because those bodies had not that lightness, allowing a smooth penetration. This feature belongs exclusively to the glorified bodies. It follows that Eve could have been injured with violence. Um, in this following passage, Roland, in reply to this argument, structures an hypothetical biology of reproduction patterned after the actual biological dynamics of nutrition, and he claims that Eve could have been opened naturally by a natural organ designed for this task without violence and pain. In the same way, she would have been more open in giving birth by natural configuration, thus without pain. As you can see, the heart could not bear the least violent breaking of any of its parts without the man dying. Nevertheless, the nourishment that spreads from the heart produces a certain opening without causing any pain, because this opening is not by violence, but by nature. So, in Roland's view, Eve's body would be endowed with a natural configuration that would make the process of giving birth, and much like the passage of the nourishment in the veins and the arteries, which open and close by nature or naturally. So imagine this kind of hypothetical biology of reproduction. But let's move on to the last topic of my talk, that is the female body and soul in the prelapsarian condition. The female body and soul relationship in the prelapsarian condition. Here we have a passage again from Albert's Summa Theologiae, and here Albert discusses the supposed weakness of Eve's mind. Because we know that according to patristic authors, and especially according to Augustine, they often maintain that the serpent approached Eve because she was more credulous, more gullible. Here, however, Albert wants to examine what kind of moral virtue is supposed to be directly linked to the feminine gender, and if this virtue would belong to Eve in the state of innocence. Albert reads the Augustinian argument through the lens of Aristotle's Ethics, and he tries to identify what kind of weakness Augustine is talking about. Such weakness of the female cannot be identified with the lack of self-control, the incontinencia. The individual who lacks self-control is unable to restrain passions within the boundaries of rationality. The continentia is a moral virtue based on the possession of a healthy reason. So, in Albert's view, cognitive functions are strongly influenced by composition and complexion of cerebral material substrate. The relative balance between material substrate and the soul faculties affects the intellectual and moral powers of the individual. So, in this view, due to their weak composition, to a weak complexion, the female rational power is compromised and she's not able to perform self-control by nature. We can conclude that there is no moral virtue directly deriving from gender, but rather an individual feminine complexion which makes females incapable by nature to achieve continence. This is confirmed by the reference to the way of living of the Holy Virgins that you can see here in the end of this passage. But let's read together. Ciprianus, pondering on the Holy Virgins, states that to live incorruptibly within a corruptible body is more angelic than human. And here, Albert wants to stress that practicing the absolute abstinence in a body that is the weaker by nature is something that goes beyond the female's natural capacity. Thus, female chastity is more angelic than human. This, however, as Albert concludes, does not apply to Eve's rational powers. In the state of innocence, the female rational soul would have been endowed with an upgraded power, the virtus continendi, provided directly by God and to providentially compensate for the weakness of the female body. So, in conclusion, even in the pristine ideal humanity, the female body is presented as a weak body. However, as we have seen in Roland's investigation, those female activities ordered to the generation of the child, such as conceiving, giving birth, bearing, breastfeeding, were facilitated by a bodily configuration that naturally predisposed the body to be open without pain. As regards the female's intellectual and moral activities, also in the Danic state, the female soul will be affected by a weak complexion, by a weak body. Female soul needed an external agency to achieve the moral virtue of self-control. God provides Eve's soul with a supplementary power, the virtus continendi, which was, however, intended to be outside feminine nature, already in the state of innocence. Thank you for your attention.